Hello and welcome everybody to the Politics program for July 31st, 2024. Your old pal Justin Robert Young joining you. We're back into equilibrium, right? Not world-shattering events every 5 minutes. We still got a lot of stuff to talk about. And the biggest thing in my mind is the Kamala Harris campaign. A lot of PR. A lot of big news, a lot of money, the Zooms, the white women, the white men. It is a whiteout on Zoom and the money is flowing. But under this lovely pile of coconuts, what are the decisions that the Kamala Harris campaign is making? We're going to take a look at 3 of them. Here's the first, the map. Here's what we know. The Harris campaign is not going to give up on the Sunbelt in the way that the Biden campaign looked like they had. So just to refresh everybody, there is a Sunbelt and Rust Belt composition to the swing states in this election. The Sunbelt is Nevada, Arizona, Georgia. The Rust Belt, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. The way that we left the campaign with Biden was that he was getting blown out in the Sunbelt. He was getting blown out in Arizona. He was getting blown out in Nevada. He was getting blown out in Georgia. And so the way to win was to draw an inside straight. Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. If you look at the composition now, you assume you're going to lose a little something in Pennsylvania with white working class voters with Kamala at the top of the ticket. But you are going to gain with black voters. And that means she's got to win Georgia. So if we're going to look now at the Sunbelt again, let's reassess our priors. So we only have one high quality poll in Arizona so far, and that is Trump +8. At this point in the last 2 cycles, it was Biden +3.7 and Clinton +0.5. Trump won it in 2016. He very narrowly lost Arizona in 2020. The only poll we have in Nevada right now is Trump +10. I'm going to put that as an incomplete, but there's not enough here for me to change the fact that Arizona and Nevada seem very much in the Trump bucket for now. Let's take a look at the map, though. We're going to put Nevada red. We're going to put Arizona red. So that right now leaves us at 252 for the Republicans, 231 for the Democrats. Let's give Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Michigan to the Democrats. All right, that brings us to 251, 252. Now, I tend to believe that Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin herd together, but for the sake of this argument, let's go ahead and say that these are free. In the world where Georgia is lost to the Democrats and the Republicans are winning there, we're back to where we were with Biden, where there had to be a clean inside straight with Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. Obviously, that makes Pennsylvania must win for the Democrats, and that is the narrowest win they could possibly have. It also means that they can't afford to lose Michigan, or else they are getting blown out in the same way with Wisconsin. So, no matter what, you need to win Pennsylvania. You can lose Pennsylvania and win Michigan and Wisconsin, and you're still going to lose in a 287 to 251 setting. Everything relies on Georgia and PA. That's it. That's what matters for the Kamala Harris ticket in my mind right now. And as far as Kamala goes in Pennsylvania, she has good news. As I am recording this right now, Susquehanna poll, they're very good. B+ pollster. They have her up 4. Margin of error of 4. But still, you want to see your numbers there go up because Pennsylvania, Georgia, that's what matters, at least the way I see it in terms of her focus. But how long will that stay the case? Let's move on to point number 2. television. I'm going to read for you right now. This is media buying on Twitter. They are great in terms of just tracking who's buying ads in which markets. 16 presidential ads in the Philly NBC news stream this morning between 5 and 7 a.m. All right. 16 presidential ads. It's not even August. 100% of the info flow is on Kamala Harris. I'm going to read you these ad buys. Preserve America PAC, it's a negative hit on Kamala. MAGA Inc., negative hit on Kamala. The Trump campaign, negative hit on Kamala. Preserve America again. Future Forward PAC, that is a Kamala bio. So there we go, an introduction, a bio, a nice thing about Kamala Harris. Then Preserve America, then MAGA, then Trump, then MAGA, then Preserve America, then Trump, then Future Forward, then Preserve America, then MAGA, then Trump campaign, then Preserve MAGA. Preserve MAGA America. Again, one. Kamala Harris is dangerously liberal. Kamala Harris is dangerously liberal. Kamala Harris is dangerously liberal. We are going to see how much that earth is irradiated by the time that Harris's campaign has the ammo and the money to put stuff up on television alongside of it. We don't know how long that advantage is going to last. We know it is certainly happening right now, and it is happening in the swing states on a level that the Trump campaign has not spent money yet. So what is Kamala's message?
The one thing Kamala Harris has always been: fearless. As a prosecutor, she put murderers and abusers behind bars. As California's Attorney General, she went after the big banks and won $20 billion for homeowners. And as Vice President, she took on the big drug companies to cap the cost of insulin for seniors. Because Kamala Harris has always known who she represents.
This campaign is about who we fight for. We believe in a future where every person has the opportunity not just to get by, but to get ahead. Where every senior can retire with dignity. But Donald Trump wants to take our country backward, to give tax breaks to billionaires and big corporations and end the Affordable Care Act. But we are not going back. I'm Kamala Harris, and I approve this message.
What do you notice there? A few things immediately. First, they want to show her, and if you are only listening to this, there's a lot of images of her in the past as a prosecutor, as district attorney, as attorney general. Show she has a record, right? She didn't just fall out of a coconut tree. They then want to take some of her most effective lines from her stump speech, from her introductory speech. She has always fought. She has fought for the little guy. She has fought for you. She is not a part of the political machine. A bit of an outsider. And then, of course, this is future versus past. This is, we are moving in the direction we need to move. We do not want to go to the past where Donald Trump, old, crusty Donald Trump lives. But I also want to tell you this eye-popping number. If Kamala Harris is getting blown out on television right now, she is absolutely scorching the earth when it comes to online buying. If you have seen a billion Kamala Harris ads over the last week, it's because she spent $28.4 million between YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram. Donald Trump's aligned interests, 1.4 million. So we have map strategy, and then we have the ad buying that is going to try to define this election. How are you going to define it? What are you building on top of? What are you distracting from? Well, one of the things that she had to do publicly, but she wanted to do quietly, was that she was officially hoping that 2019 never existed. Let's all remember that when she ran in that primary, which was a pretty far left primary, she staked herself out a pretty progressive slate. Medicare for all, a mandatory gun buyback, and a ban on fracking. All three things that this weekend her campaign came out and said she's not for any of that. What was that? All that stuff? Oh, just some stuff you say. It's not that you're not married to it for life, right? You're just, it's just some stuff you say. The problem with Kamala is that she said it into microphones, and sometimes, specifically when we're talking about Pennsylvania, a state that does rely on natural gas that is produced through fracking, sometimes you say it into microphones that are slow jamming the news on Jimmy Fallon's Tonight Show.
This country's got a whole lot of hot button issues that we could touch on. But what's the first thing we need to do to give us all some relief?
Well, let me start by saying this. Climate change is the single greatest threat facing our world today. That's why I am committed to passing a Green New Deal, creating clean jobs, and finally putting an end to fracking once and for all.
Mama La Kamala just don't give a frack.
Now look, will any of this matter? Maybe, maybe not. The one thing that I am sure of is that we are in a post-truth conversation when it at least comes to the stated goals of either campaign. Kamala Harris has gone out, as Joe Biden did, and every time that they talk, say that Donald Trump is going to ban birth control, ban IVF, and do a nationwide abortion ban. Donald Trump, whenever he talks, says, I would like to do none of those things. And the Democrats say, well, don't believe him. Come on. Come on. You can't believe him. He lies. Donald Trump is going to get up and say that Kamala Harris will ban fracking, ban guns, and eliminate your private health care. And Kamala Harris will say, I don't believe in any of those things. And the Republicans will say, we can't believe her. She lies. And without an actual conversation on these things that take each other seriously, and certainly we are far away from policy proposals on any of this, it is just going to be a vibes election. Who do you believe the most when they say the other person's lying? I'm going to be very focused on Pennsylvania and Georgia polls. I'm going to be very focused on the national polls. But I do believe that by the end of this week, we are going to know a lot more about where we stand. We're also probably going to know who the vice president nominee for Kamala Harris is going to be, and that's what we're going to talk about with Gabe Fleisher right after the update. This is your update, brought to you by TakePoliticsSeriously.com. That's where you can get 2 bonus episodes of this show every Monday, every Thursday. We bring it to you no matter where we are. We'll get to all the benefits of that. Let's get into the news. President Biden will propose term limits for Supreme Court justices and a constitutional amendment to counteract their recent presidential immunity decision. This from a speech at the Lyndon Baines Johnson Presidential Library in Austin, where I am broadcasting from. Biden advocated for a binding code of conduct for the justices. He emphasized that no one is above the law, including the president and Supreme Court justices. This, of course, marks a tone shift for Biden, who previously resisted Supreme Court reforms. He criticized the court's recent decisions as being a right-leaning, if not MAGA, party organization, particularly those affecting abortion rights and presidential immunity. Biden's proposal includes an 18-year term limit for justices and a constitutional amendment to eliminate criminal immunity for former presidents. He also calls on an enforceable ethics code for justices, highlighting recent controversies over some gifts and trips. I was initially going to make this part of the A block just because I don't know where Harris released a statement saying she agreed with all this. You'd imagine that something as big as this would be something that they'd want to do together. It doesn't seem like anything that Biden would be able to get done in the next 100 days. So if he's in a lame duck situation, then I guess he's just laying down the marker to say, hey, I talked about it, but who knows? Let's move outside the U.S. Venezuela, which, by the way, I was on a walk on Sunday, and there was just a line of cars with Venezuelan, I assume people, hanging out the window, flying Venezuelan flags, honking the horn. And when you grow up in South Florida, which is filled with a lot of Central American, Caribbean Americans, you see that often. People in their cars honking the horn, really excited, waving flags. Normally it means that their country won a soccer tournament. 9 times out of 10, that's what it means. This time it meant that Nicolas Maduro, the Hugo Chavez disciple running Venezuela, had apparently through democratic means been excised. That was until Maduro counted the votes and said, oh, turns out I narrowly won. Crazy. But we have seen a lot of unrest around it. Of course, nearly 8 million Venezuelans have fled their country over the past decade, and increased unrest, which is right now certain, would almost undoubtedly heighten the refugee crisis this while the U.S. election is ongoing. Protests erupted following Maduro's victory, and it has been condemned internationally for its lack of fairness. The Biden administration is facing calls for action, although it is likely to respond more cautiously than the Trump administration did, which previously imposed harsh sanctions. Republicans will be using Venezuela's situation to criticize the tepid nature of the Biden administration's foreign policy. And finally, at a rally in Butler, Pennsylvania, Secret Service snipers and former President Trump's security details were aware of the gunman on the nearby roof until the shots were fired. Again, they did not know that that guy was up there. Secret Service and Trump's detail had no idea he was up there until the shots were fired. That was revealed by acting Secret Service Director Ronald Rowe speaking with the Senate this morning on Tuesday. Rowe detailed communications breakdown and a faulty counter drone system, explaining why Trump was allowed to take the stage despite local police reporting a suspicious individual 90 minutes prior. Rowe admitted the Secret Service teams were not aware of the gunman until hearing gunshots, blaming siloed information within local security channels. He also expressed shame over the inadequately secured roof and acknowledged connectivity challenges that hindered early development of a counter drone system. I did not watch all of this. I watched clips of it, and I saw the body language as I was preparing this episode on my quad. I gotta say, night and day from Kimberly Cheadle, the former Secret Service head. Without doubting her credentials, the way she was talking and the way she was acting seemed like somebody who didn't want to lose her job. This man, Ronald Rowe, appears like somebody who has the weight on the world on his shoulders, for which I think is an appropriate feeling if you are a Secret Service head. He said the first thing that he did when he got the job was to fly to Butler, Pennsylvania, lay on that roof, and see the line of sight. And what he saw was shameful. That's how you do one of these things, for the record. The FBI, which was also part of this, says that they have uncovered social media accounts linked to the gunman, revealing anti-Semitic and anti-immigrant rhetoric, and noted that the Secret Service was alerted about the suspect 25 minutes before the shooting. I'm going to wait and see on all of the social media stuff. I'm very suspicious of it. You know, you had the classmates of the gunman saying that he was the last person in school. He's relentlessly bullied, and he was the last person in school to be wearing a mask. That would appear to have a certain political fingerprint. You have the CEO of Gab that said federal law enforcement had been inquiring about a certain social media account so they published the social media account, and that seemed to be antagonistic to people. It was kind of an account just to antagonize people on Gab, which is a right-leaning platform. My statement on all of this, as it has always been, is that I kind of already know enough of my motive on this. He wanted to shoot Donald Trump in the face and did, just thankfully not fatally. In general, the minds of shooters are not cleanly grafted on to mainstream political thought. But still, I'm not believing anything until I see it. I'm not believing rumors. I'm not believing nothing. You can believe in this. 2 bonus episodes each and every week. TakePoliticsSeriously.com. And folks, things are moving as fast as possible. So head on over there right now. TakePoliticsSeriously.com is where you need to go. $3 level gets you 2 bonus episodes each and every week. If you'd buy me a cup of coffee to get an extra hour and a half of content, sometimes 2 hours, depending, well, come on. Get on the train. TakePoliticsSeriously.com. Now to Gabe Fleisher. Joining us back on the program is Wake Up to Politics' own Gabe Fleisher. And Gabe, I have to say, you've run that newsletter for a long time. You graduate, you are now a pro, and in your first few months as a pro, you see about 10 years worth of political news. So far, so good in terms of your professional career as a reporter. But if it goes at this trajectory, we might not have an Earth by Christmas.
Yeah, it's kind of insane. Yeah, I was kind of hoping, usually summers, a little bit of a downtime in politics. I knew it was going to be like working right after graduation, but I thought maybe I'd graduate, kind of ease into things. The news cycle had other ideas, so here we are.
Well, I'll tell you what, you are already seasoned in many different ways, which is the reason why we are going to get into what is already a fast-moving process. We did our eulogy for the Biden campaign last Friday. Now we are doing something that we don't normally do this late in the process, and that is talking VPs. The comparison has been made for this 100 days to kind of a British snap election or what they do in Europe. There is some similarities here of people kind of staffing up the questions of who's going to be where. If you are just watching whatever we've seen over the last week, what do you think for the Kamala Harris ticket is the biggest need that you would want to fill on this ballot?
Yeah, I mean, to me, if I was in the room kind of, with the Harris campaign making this decision, to me, it feels somewhat clear, I guess I would say. There are 3 states they need to win: Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. Currently, according to polls, Joe Biden was down quite a bit in all 3, fairly comfortably in all 3. Harris is, at best tied, but not clearly leading all 3 of those. Mm-hmm. So how much can a vice presidential candidate really help the ticket? It's unclear. There's different studies have shown different answers, and a lot of people would suggest there's not even much of an effect. But if there is, generally there is at least somewhat of a bump in the VP candidate's home state. So to me, you just really need anyone who can maximize their ability to win in one of those 3 states. I think, to me, that's most likely Josh Shapiro in Pennsylvania. And otherwise, there's really no one else to me that can pick up. There are people that can't hurt the ticket, which is often what you're looking for at the VP slot. But in terms of people who could actually help, I think it's kind of a small list because it's a small list of states they're targeting. And to me, Shapiro is the one kind of statewide office holder in one of those states that has the clearest kind of, I think, added potential for the ticket.
And as we've talked about earlier in this very podcast, Pennsylvania and Georgia are, to me, the entire Harris campaign from this point. If you look at the map, unless you are going to imagine that Nevada or Arizona are going to become more unstuck than they have been, and their polling has been remarkably steady throughout this, then it's only Pennsylvania and Georgia, and the Harris campaign has to have both. So if we're going to look at that, well, actually, here, hold on. Let's take one step back. I do want to prosecute this a little bit, the idea of the the strategic vice presidential pick, because while it's certainly, look, Josh Shapiro is an electoral force there. Is it enough to tilt this election? We don't know. In my opinion, anybody who takes that role is going to be the third person people think of when they cast a ballot. It's going to be Biden, Harris, and then whoever this third person is. And the order of Biden and Harris is up to this campaign. But everything else, no one is going to be above Biden that comes in this late in the process. The last time that we saw a candidate get picked with a swing state on the line was John Edwards for the Democrats, and he was not able to deliver his home state of North Carolina. You could make an argument that we've only become more political polarized since 2004. So I don't know. I mean, yes, statewide wins matter. Josh Shapiro won statewide. That matters. Mark Kelly won statewide. That matters in Arizona. A Gretchen Whitmer or a Tim Walz matter, although Tim Walz would be on a state that you already assume you have a better shot at in Minnesota. But I don't know if it matters as much as the kind of the narratives and the vibes of whatever the story that Kamala Harris wants to tell, because they got to microwave that.
And I don't disagree with any of that. And I think we should be clear here that whatever effect Shapiro might have in the ticket, I think you're absolutely right. This is at best the third most important person. It's a great way to put it that people are thinking about. But I would note, so whatever effect we're talking about, it's not going to be large. I think there's basically two major studies that have been done on this. One has suggested vice presidential candidates can bring about a 1-point bump in their home states. There's another study, and I talked to the author of it yesterday, political scientist, who they found about a 3-point bump in their home state, which obviously in Pennsylvania, that would likely be enough for Harris to win. But I was talking to this political scientist, and there's also cases that I do think there are politicians that are so uniquely popular that can kind of not override polarization to the degree that, Harris isn't going to win Pennsylvania by 55, 60 points in any universe. That's not possible. But could it be that you might see more than a 0.5 to 1 point bump to a 1.5 to 2 point bump? If it were to be anyone, I do think there's a strong case to be made for Shapiro. His approval rating is above 60% in the state. That's pretty remarkable considering it's Pennsylvania. It's a closely divided state. I don't know if you saw the Fox News poll that came out recently. They tested 3 candidates against Trump in Pennsylvania. Yep. Harris was tied, Gretchen Whitmer was down 1, and Josh Shapiro beat Trump by 10 in Pennsylvania.
Yes.
Now, that wouldn't be the case if it's Harris-Shapiro. You wouldn't have the same 10-point bump. But even if you have a sliver, a fraction of that bump, that's all it would take for her to win Pennsylvania and likely the election. So I agree with you, the VP pick is unlikely to have some huge effect in the election. But again, they need 3 states to win. If they have a candidate that can give them some solid bump in one of those 3 states, to me, if you're looking solely electorally, and there's a case to be made that the vice presidential pick should be more than just electoral politics, I certainly believe that. But if you're looking solely at the electoral math, I think that is kind of the clearest shot for anyone who could make something of a bump.
There is no doubt that he has a hold on Pennsylvania. And yet, there is a gigantic asterisk here, and let's dive into it, and that is that Pennsylvania, and especially the Democrats that have come out of Pennsylvania, Shapiro and Fetterman, have both united on one very, very specific thing: a unqualified support for the state of Israel and harsh rhetoric for protesters that are in support of Gaza and the Palestinian cause, if not, as was spray painted in D.C., Hamas. So, with the DNC looming in Chicago, with the specter of 1968 there, I wonder if that were not here and Josh Shapiro were into it, unlike Gretchen Whitmer, who seems to be backpedaling as far away from this as possible, seemingly with an eye toward 2028. I think he's the absolute slam dunk pick. But what do you do with all that?
And I think that's a very fair point. I think the one thing I would say quickly, I would separate Shapiro and Fetterman. I think you're right to draw a parallel. I don't know that unqualified support is the right way to describe Shapiro stands for Israel. He has called Netanyahu the worst leader in, I believe, Israeli
Okay,
history.
fair point.
I don't remember the exact quote, but he's been much more critical of Netanyahu than Fetterman, so I would draw a distinction there. Not to say that he hasn't been fairly pro-Israel, and that will obviously be an issue that will come up. To me, it is, I think you mentioned the word vibes before, and I do think it's this thing. I've talked to a few different kind of young activists since Harris announced. I've been very struck by like kind of how quickly the vibes did shift, where like I've been talking to people that like they weren't, like anti-Biden per se, but they were not, they were not supportive of him. They might, if they were voted for him, it was going to be begrudgingly. And now suddenly, they're posting coconut memes and they're like all in on Harris. And I was asking some of them, what would the VP pick? How would that, affect it? Most of them are pretty supportive of Tim Walz, who we can talk about, who's kind of emerged as kind of the progressive favorite. And they all mentioned, about Shapiro, his support for Israel, his support of school vouchers. And none of them said those would be red lines. They would still support Harris. But they said that kind of the energy behind the Harris ticket would be drained. And I kind of think there's truth to that to some extent, that like all this kind of online enthusiasm that has frankly, somewhat surprisingly, cropped up behind the Harris bid would not completely disappear, but evaporate with a Shapiro pick. But again, to me, that is just one of those things where, like, the slogan of the Biden campaign in 2020 was "Twitter is not real life." Yeah. Like, if you're the Harris campaign, and they're running this polling, maybe the polling isn't as favorable for Shapiro in Pennsylvania in their polls as some of the public polling suggests. But if it is, it's one of those things where if you're a professional political campaign, you might be willing to lose a few TikToks if you're gaining a few votes in Pennsylvania. And like that might change like the online vibes of the campaign, which is notable and something you and I would notice and talk about. But at the end of the day, if like white working class voters in Pennsylvania are supporting her in higher numbers, that's worth losing, many of these youth activists I'm talking about. They're fairly engaged in politics, they're passionate, but coming from, California, New York, states that Harris is going to win anyways. You're willing to lose some of those votes or some of their enthusiasm if you're picking up, people in Pennsylvania who might not be as online or as kind of politically engaged, but who maybe could be swayed by a Shapiro pick. So I think that to me is the calculation you have.
I very much agree with you, and I think that in the three that seem to have emerged as our final slate for now, Shapiro to me would be the hardest initially, because you would be sacrificing some of the Brat summer hilarity, you would be sacrificing some of the coconut meme stuff, but you would be saying, hey, I'm serious. I'm serious. I'm picking top talent off our bench. Somebody that can and should probably run for president himself, that has that in his future. I'm going to take a position that some of the people in my party that are the loudest, that might actually make this convention a mess, I'm willing to deal with it because I believe this is the Democratic vision forward. If you try to do that, but a little bit more boring and a little bit more let's avoid the Gaza stuff, let's avoid the Israel stuff, you go with Mark Kelly in Arizona, which I still don't think that puts Arizona in play, at least based on the numbers that we've seen right now. But I have said from the very beginning, man, you can do worse than an astronaut. And if what you want is, a bit of a future past, gee whiz, let's go to let's walk forward. Here are the interesting, cool people that are from the West of America that are leading the Democratic Party forward. I think Kelly could be that pick. What do you think about him?
Yeah, I think, there's no question if you're going off like biography alone, you're right. You can't be better than Mark Kelly. Not obviously just, his military past, his astronaut past. Obviously, you have his wife, Gabby Giffords, a very inspirational story, especially in a year where we've seen where political violence has been a hot topic and assassination attempts. There's no question that, kind of having, kind of the Kelly Gifford star power on the ticket would be considerable. I think I agree with you, in terms of, I will say in terms of Kelly versus Shapiro, Kelly brings, somewhat more, at least, well, I would say, I would just say yes. I think Kelly does not bring kind of the home state boost in the same way that Shapiro would, just based off of his support in Arizona, based off where Arizona is politically. So I don't think there's as much of kind of a home state electoral argument there. But I think Shapiro essentially is kind of the high risk, high reward candidate. And then now with kind of Cooper out, Kelly becomes, and it's weird to call an astronaut like the boring pick, but he's he's somewhat of a safe pick. There's some issues. He's in the past not been supportive of the PRO Act, some labor trouble perhaps, but now he's seemingly kind of swung in support of it. So you'd mostly be able to keep the base in line with him. I'm not sure there's this huge category of voters that are won over by him. But yeah, I mean, the advertising writes itself between the astronaut, between, Gabby Giffords. So certainly a pick that, again, in kind of the classic VP, like thinking of do no harm, I think Kelly would not do much harm and certainly would bring, an interesting biography to the ticket.
It also, and who knows what these conversations are within the Harris campaign, because they're going to have to make some of these calls in the next few weeks. But if you pick a Kelly, then you are signaling that, hey, I'm going to put a little bit of distance between me and Joe on the border. Maybe I start talking about things in a bit of a different way. I start signaling that, hey, you want to know what? Maybe there were mistakes. Kelly can lead the way on that. He has been critical of the Biden administration. So you can mitigate that a little bit if that's where you want to go. And to circle back to a point you made a little bit ago, I totally agree that this kumbaya, super excited, 4 million raised in the white guys for Harris Zoom moment that we're in right now, that's going to end, not because Kamala Harris is any more or less exciting or different or a viable candidate, but just because right now everyone's looking at her and they're saying, well, first, you're not Biden, and we're thrilled. And secondly, you are what I want you to be. Either a moderate, you are a progressive, you are whatever you are. She's already started to make some of these decisions to take herself away from the 2019 record, which we'll see how successful she'll be at that. But the more you make these decisions, the more that people are going to say, wait a minute, maybe you're not the person that I thought you were, and now I'm going to quietly delete the coconut avatar.
Yeah, and I will say, I think the immigration point you made on Kelly is a really strong one. As you were saying it, a kind of parallel that occurred to me is, kind of, obviously not as extreme as this, but if you go back to Al Gore in 2000, trying to distance himself from Bill Clinton, who was then declining somewhat, obviously not too much in popularity, but at least kind of narrative-wise, obviously had just been impeached, surrounded by a sex scandal, and he picked Joe Lieberman, one of the Democratic senators who had been the most critical of Clinton, as this kind of ultimate way to distance himself from the unpopular parts of the Clinton record and to really show he was his own person. I think that sounds nice in theory. I don't see from Harris the same, I guess, appetite or willingness or kind of risk-taking ability to kind of distance herself from Biden in the same way, which makes me suspect, even if she were to pick Kelly, that if anything, he would end up changing his rhetoric on the border, not her.
Yes.
But it would be, if she were to go for it, it would be interesting because there's no doubt after inflation, it's the biggest vulnerability of the Democratic ticket right now. And Kelly, he's right there in a border state, has close relationships with a lot of the sheriffs and border patrol officers on the ground, and has really made it a core issue of his in Arizona, being from a border state. So it would be a smart play. I'm just not sure. I think what would end up happening is you'd see more kind of Kelly flip-flops on the border.
Yeah.
That would make the whole issue even much more of a morass for them than already is, than what Harris maybe should be doing, which is moderating on the border and being critical of her.
Which is like, why do you pick the guy from Arizona if you're not going to change your opinion on the border, right? Like if you really want to expand that map to Arizona, then you have to talk about the border differently, because all the Arizona Democrats that have won there statewide talk about it differently than Joe Biden. So. Let's go to the candidate that would strip the irony right off those coconut heads, the leftists that have memed this into existence, and that is Tim Walz. Tim Walz has been pushing probably as hard as anybody not named Pete Buttigieg, and I do want to get to him in a second, for this position, and he has done a very credible job of selling a straight up and down progressive idea for what he has done for Minnesota, and obviously road testing that for what he could do for a Kamala Harris ticket. The question is, from my point of view, why are you distancing yourself away from 2019 if you're going to put a progressive vice president who's that loquacious that wants to go out there and talk about progressive policies?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think there's no question Tim Walz, he's a very effective communicator. I think he comes off as this, he's a former kind of, teacher, football coach, comes off as a pretty kind of normal Midwestern guy, just kind of talking to you. And, there's no question on messaging. He's already had great influence over the Harris campaign message as kind of the one who's come up with this kind of, sudden messaging, turn of the campaign, branding Republicans.
The weird.
As weird. That kind of came from him originally. So there's no question he's had influence. And I think that shows would be a big surrogate for the campaign, even if he's not chosen. I agree with you. Ultimately, I don't know who he brings for them. I think ultimately, if you're the Harris campaign, you just need to be laser focused on essentially, these kinds of moderate and independent, kind of many white working class voters, in states bordering Walz's, but not in Minnesota specifically. And I think ultimately Walz, he fires up the base, but I'm not sure he brings over so many of those voters. So I don't know, electorally how much of a benefit he would be, but there's no question he would fire up the progressive base that had been pretty much dormant, for the entire Biden candidacy. If we're talking about, I agree with you, probably at some point a lot of this online energy would fade, but that's certainly something she could do to kind of like shoot it in the arm and kind of keep up that momentum for the next few months. He's definitely, a strong campaigner. He is, he is progressive, but, he's been able to get a lot of those kinds of progressive priorities done, but it has hurt his electoral record. He's basically, when you're talking about Shapiro or Kelly, those are people that have, in Shapiro's case, run ahead of Biden by, like 10, 13 points. In Kelly's case, also ran ahead of Biden, not by quite as much. And then Walz is someone who I think is essentially run behind Biden, kind of below the Democratic baseline. So I think ultimately he's someone you see as a very strong surrogate and communicator for your ticket. But if you're looking for someone who's going to help the ticket, you want someone who's going to be improving on the Democratic baseline, not running behind it. And Walz just hasn't shown in his past elections that he's experienced to do better than the average Democrat, not worse.
Buttigieg. Has it surprised you that he has campaigned for this so hard? Because I'm a little surprised by it, but I think that this is just him saying whether or not Kamala wins, I don't want to be too far away from this spotlight.
Yeah, I mean, if you think of Pete Buttigieg, he was mayor of a small town. Now he's transportation secretary. Even if he's not VP, maybe he can get some sort of cabinet slot. Reportedly, he wanted UN ambassador in the first administration. He has no foreign policy experience, so unclear why he would receive that, but perhaps he would receive that or some other cabinet slot in a Harris administration. But especially if she loses, he has no path to kind of political relevance. He's moved to Michigan, so maybe he tries to run for office there. Michigan has a pretty deep bench of, pretty credible Democratic candidates who aren't carpetbaggers, who don't have kind of have actual roots in the state. He moved there, just at the beginning of the Biden administration, because I believe his husband is from there. So, he doesn't really have much else of a route. Obviously he's someone who wants to be president one day, but there's not much path there unless he is the vice presidential candidate this time. It's kind of hard to sketch out how he gets onto a national ticket in 2028, 2032, if all he has on his record is small town mayor and secretary of transportation. So I think this is kind of his shot. And, going on TV, it's what he's good at. So, if kind of basically how the Veep Stakes auditioning goes is kind of booking yourself on as many channels and shows as possible, that's somewhere Buttigieg is going to stick out and look well because he's famously good at talking on TV, including in kind of hostile territory on Fox and kind of in, with less kind of cozy interviewers. So, it's not surprising to me, I guess, to see him kind of auditioning in that way and kind of putting it all out there for what is maybe his last chance at a national ticket. Again, not sure exactly what he brings electorally to the ticket that he doesn't bring just as a surrogate, talking for them on TV.
Yeah.
But there's no question he's good at that. And, he's been showing that, in spades the last few days.
No one's got the Rolodex he does, or Liz Smith does, whoever's actually booking it for him. He's gotten everywhere he needs to be. He was on The Daily Show last night, on Fox. Again, these are like the bread and butter 2020. Pete goes from nobody to a relevant blueprint of how he microwaved himself into relevancy the first place. I've got real questions of how white working class voters turn out with Kamala Harris and Pete Buttigieg on the ticket. But, if you wanted to throw your hat over the wall and say, the Democratic Party, it's the Republicans that are obsessed with identity. It's the Republicans that are obsessed with these questions. We want to offer good common sense solutions, and these are the two best people to do it, Kamala Harris and Pete Buttigieg. It's an argument you can make. Mm-hmm. I don't know how it plays in the union halls of, Pennsylvania, but, we'll see. We'll see.
Yeah, and obviously it's a very young ticket. It is a ticket,
Yep.
Going back to what you said before about clearly the Harris campaign, one of their big messages so far has been, we're about the future, they're about the past. That's certainly a ticket that, would be advancing, with a black woman on top, and then also a young gay man, you would see, advancing that same message. I agree with you. I'm not sure electorally, if the country is there per se, but it certainly would kind of fit with that kind of broader narrative of kind of a future-minded, youthful, next-generation ticket.
It would be amazing to see the both of them out there getting their hunting license in Pennsylvania. That would be quite a moment in political history. Are there any dark horses that you see in this? Because normally normally this stuff is considered over months, right? Like, by the time that we start talking about it in the press, a lot of these other names are just kind of honorariums that you want to reward for good surrogates. So they'll always be mentioned as being close to this level. But now it does seem fluid. You've got Mark Halperin, who has emerged from the Me Too shadow realm as the master of whisperers in this process after nailing the Biden thing, saying that nobody who wants it can pass a vetting. And so that's part of the reason why we keep seeing these names shake up. Is there anybody that we haven't talked about that you think might have a shot at this?
I'm not sure. I mean, the reason this does usually take months, these people are vetted really, really closely, and it does take a lot of vetting. So I think that is kind of honestly the reason why I think it's more likely to be one of the names we're hearing about, less someone who kind of just emerges from the shadows. Because, if it is, I think usually when you think of dark horses, a lot of the people you might think of are kind of from the business world or military world, but those are people that have never been elected by anyone to anything and have gone through very little vetting and, might be kind of a riskier pick. So, you've seen, if you consider Gary Peters a dark horse, he was floated the other day. If you had asked me a few days ago, I would have said Tim Walz is kind of the dark horse, since he was not really mentioned at all at the beginning of this process. I think clearly he wouldn't fit that label anymore. I mean, at the very beginning, it was. I was very intrigued to see Admiral McRaven take his name, withdraw his name from consideration. Very interesting because not many people were putting his name into consideration, which suggested to me that he must have been contacted by the Harris campaign to be vetted.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. That's not something I've reported as fact, but why else put out a statement removing yourself if not having been contacted? Suggests to me that maybe they are looking, in kind of the kind of business or military world. I think that would be smart to at least look at. There are names, like McRaven. You could think of like a Mark Cuban or someone like that who really could kind of have some sort of crossover appeal. I think McRaven could have been a smart pick too. I certainly think it would be smart for Harris to, it's been notable to me how many readers I've gotten writing into me talking about interest in a bipartisan ticket. I don't think that's going to happen, but at least for her to talk about some bipartisan cabinet picks or put some conversation there, I think would be interesting, or at least some kind of centrist, moderate, or not necessarily Republican running mate, but someone who exists outside of the party structure. I think we talk about it every 4 years and ultimately doesn't happen, so I don't expect it to. But, that's perhaps the kind of world we might be looking in.
Very, very, very Sarkonian,
Exactly.
the bipartisan ticket. Has it surprised you how many people have pulled their name out? I don't remember, usually you don't pull your name. You always say, look, if called upon, I will serve, blah, 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 blah. No, you might think that you're out, but you very rarely run to the press and say, my job's here in Michigan, like Gretchen Whitmer, or Roy Cooper in North Carolina, General McRaven. I don't know. This might be complicated by the fact that we are so close to other elections. There's a lot of other complicating factors that don't normally exist when this kind of stuff is happening, or you can quietly whisper to it. But it does seem like some of these folks don't want to be close to this campaign.
I think that's true to some degree. I would say I don't think the number of withdrawals has been atypical of a normal process. I mean, remember Amy Klobuchar did the same thing in 2020 during the Democratic vetting. I think it is normal to see a few names kind of do that, for whatever personal electoral reasons. I think, frankly, if you're joining the Harris campaign at this point, it is on one hand, an opportunity for this kind of grand national exposure on kind of a scale unlike anything else. And it's also, a very risky proposition for your career, attaching yourself with only 100 days to go to a ticket that is maybe tied, but in most polls at least, an inch behind. So, what is currently a losing ticket that could change. Yeah. And, next to a vice president who has been fairly unpopular, who is fairly untested, who, is right now looking really good, but, has struggled in the past to kind of bring campaigns across the finish line. So it's a risky proposition if you're someone who wants to preserve your kind of national reputation for 2028, 2032. I believe the only failed vice presidential candidate to make it onto a national ticket, or to make it to the presidency, was Franklin Roosevelt. It was the 1920 Democratic VP pick, then 12 years later elected president. But I think if you're someone without FDR's kind of unique political skills and biography, it's a hard thing to do. You're kind of branded a loser. There's a reason no one was looking to Tim Kaine in 2020. I don't think his name was ever mentioned amongst the kind of 20 Democrats that ran. No one was calling for Tim Kaine to come back and kind of be the presidential nominee. So not only are you a loser, you're like the undercard loser. So it's just like not a great place to kind of build back up a national profile. So unless you're someone, we've talked about people like, a Pete Buttigieg, who maybe it's his only route to national prominence. If you do feel like if you're currently kind of a big state governor or senator and you have, completely other route in 2028 or 2032, if this fizzles, maybe you kind of just sit back and say, I'll wait, I'll bide my time. I'm good. I'll do it on my own terms in the future.
I kind of think that this is an underrated opportunity for the reason that we said before, that you're the third person on the blame pool too. Like if this crashes and burns, the blame is going to go in the following order: Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, every other issue on the planet. Throw in, we ran too hard on Project 2025. We did this. We had no issue on the record. A million different things before they get to you. What you would represent is when the party needed me, I stood up and I marched into the breach and I did X, Y, and Z. And now, does that mean that you have a better, brighter future? Who knows? But from what you've said, aside from Josh Shapiro feels like the only guy that I know for sure, whether or not he's on this ticket, I'm going to see him on a presidential debate stage at some point. But other than that, everybody else that you would think about that, the Gretchen Whitmers of the world, although a 2-female ticket is something that we have never seen before, like everyone's moonwalking away from this that has a higher profile. It is interesting because I do think it's a good opportunity because it's fairly low risk.
Yeah, I mean, I think in general, the vice presidency is, I suppose, kind of the most underrated office on the planet, but it is kind of eternally underrated. I mean, we have seen in the last 2 weeks just how quickly a vice president can shave that first half of the title off. And, how quickly, if you are the kind of number two, how that does position you. About a fourth of presidents have been vice presidents. It's, it is the most natural succession route if you want to be president one day. So I do think, as much as I understand the electoral calculations, I think a lot of people are running, and I think they are probably worried about blame and risk. But I think at the end of the day, sometimes I think probably politicians overcomplicate it. If you want to be president, the best route is through the vice presidency. And right now, the best route to the vice presidency is being on one of the 2 national tickets. Doesn't mean you're guaranteed to win, but, it's going to be either Harris or Trump, and then their heir is going to be one of their 2 VPs. So, I was a little surprised. I mean, to see Roy Cooper, there's been basically 2 reasons floated about why he took his name out. One was about fear about what Mark Robinson, who's lieutenant governor, was acting governor when he's out of state. I think that makes sense. And if that is why, then it's a fairly selfless decision for, what he thinks is the good of his state, to kind of pull out of national prominence for the good of his state. Then the other reason, a little bit less selfless, is he wants to run for Senate in 2026. And, maybe he is someone who would rather just be, he's, I believe, 71. So this is more just someone who wants to be in office for longer, not necessarily scale the heights, just kind of wants to go the distance. But, if you are someone who wants to kind of climb up the ladder, it is somewhat of an odd decision to defer a chance at the vice presidency for a Senate seat 2 years out. Doesn't so much make sense as a calculation, but everyone has different, wants and desires. If he's 71, he might be more looking for kind of the Senate essentially is kind of the nicest retirement post in American politics, just kind of ride out his career there rather than kind of climb up the national ladder. I think for some politicians that can make sense. But if you do want to be president, I agree with you. In some ways, I do think attaching yourself to this ticket in this time is risky. But, you only become president by taking risks, and the best way to become president.
I mean, I think the ticket is very risky. I think like the ticket itself right now, as I see the race, could be a Suicide Squad movie, right? Like, there is a chance that the people that are being stapled to this and staffing this campaign, that there are powers that be that just want to see them run into the wall so they never have to deal with them ever again. That being said, maybe not. We live in a very polarized environment. There's a million different ways. And again, you're going to be way down on the blame structure. Last week, Gabe, it was all press releases. It was all enthusiasm, lovely pile of coconuts. This week, I think we're seeing a lot of numbers. We are going to see a lot of numbers. I think we are going to get a better idea of where this race is right now. What are you looking at specifically?
I mean, I think, to me, something that's been striking to me, there was a lot of pressure on Joe Biden in his final days as a candidate to be doing interviews and to be kind of answering questions of reporters, as there should have been, because he had barely been doing that as president. Kamala Harris has yet to sit down for kind of a full-length interview since she has become the nominee, and you've not seen really either any political or media pressure, interestingly, for her to do that amid this kind of, buzz of momentum and good feelings around her. And we've seen her do a lot of speeches. That's something she is historically very good at. Interviews are somewhere
very prompter focused.
Exactly.
She is going on the numbers.
Exactly. I mean, one of her first interviews as vice president with Lester Holt, where she was asked about going to the border, she did really poorly, and then kind of reportedly refused to do interviews for like months after that.
Yeah.
The fear of it going like that again. So anyway, so something that I'm looking for is once Harris actually faces some kind of real adversarial, I guess not only media coverage, and eventually she's just going to have to sit down for, some network interview. And I think it's very possible. I'm sure her team has prepped her, and she's probably better than she was in 2021, but she does have a lot to answer for. She'll have a lot of awkward questions about Biden's age and kind of her kind of views on how much he's aged and why he did drop out and how he did in the debate. And she has a lot to answer for their record on inflation, on the border. Her campaign's been kind of distancing themselves from the kind of role she took as kind of the point person for kind of the root causes of migration / border czar, depending who you ask or what you want to call it. But either way, whether or not she was in charge of it, she is the vice president. So she'll need to answer those questions about his record, and she really hasn't yet. So I'll be watching to see whether.
I hated that. I hate that. Like, one of the first things that they did was start working the refs again on the phrase border czars. I wish she wasn't the border czar. Yeah, no, there is no such thing as a czar. We don't have czars in American government. It's a thing we call a job you have. Like, it's meant to make you look special. That was your thing. Nobody, is under any illusions that it was a good job. You got a bad job. That's what vice presidents get, are the bad jobs. Yeah, we'll see. I'm curious over this next week just to see about the moves they make. And really, one of the biggest things that every presidential campaign has to do is have a reason for running. Beyond not the other guy. You have to have a story. You have to have a thing. And the next time that they come out of, they do an interview like this, I think you can craft a narrative of, hey, in the waning days of Biden, he gave me all of his wisdom, and it's combined with my fresh appeal, the future is going to be whatever the future is going to be. But right now, she has not screwed up. Great, she has allowed the enthusiasm to carry her. But I agree. I think that is a very salient point, and from my perspective, I'm just Pennsylvania and Georgia. That's all. I just want numbers from those two states, because I think that's the election right now. The Democrats need Pennsylvania, and they need Georgia. Otherwise, if you can't turn out Atlanta with Kamala Harris at the top of the ticket, then what are you doing, man? What are you
Which
doing?
is why, right as we're talking, where is she? She'll be in Atlanta tonight.
She's going to be with Megan Thee Stallion in Atlanta, with the rest of the hot girls, and Stacey Abrams. Stacey Abrams is back in a big way in POG form. You can Wake Up to Politics each and every morning by the great Gabe Fleisher. Where can folks find that, sir?
WakeUpToPolitics.com.
There we go. Now on Substack.
That's right.
Now on Substack. So get it in that Substack app. Have a good time. It is a great platform. Thank you so much, buddy.
Thanks so much for having me.
Politics is written and hosted by me, Justin Robert Young, for Dog and Pony Show Audio in Austin, Texas. You can email the show, theyoungamerican@gmail.com. Follow me on social media. TikTok is Justin R. Young. Instagram is Justin R. Young. YouTube. Love the YouTube audience. Like and subscribe and ring that bell. Politics is the handle there. And a reminder for you YouTube folks, if you are on Take Politics Seriously, if you are getting our Patreon content, it's all on YouTube too. Every single thing that we do. Bonus stuff, regular stuff. It's all plus video these days. So head on over there. Twitter is Justin R. Young, and you can share the audio podcast with your friends, family, and clergy. px3podcast.com. That is letter P, number 3, letter X, podcast.com. Should probably have that down by now. If you'd like to hit me up with a one-time donation, it is paypal.me/paidjury. Venmo is Justin-Young-20. Venmo money isn't real, for the record. Cash App is PX3 Cash, and you can send me any kind of thing you'd like in the mail, including checks. P.O. Box 153184, Austin, Texas 78715. Again, Post Office Box 153184, Austin, Texas 78715. You can always get our bonus content at TakePoliticsSeriously.com. Our $3 tier gets you 2 bonus podcasts per week covering all the news that we miss on our free podcasting schedule. And our $10 tier gets your name read at the end of the show like these fine folks in the Titanic. $10 tier. CP, Dave Potts, Nicholas, Whiskey Wolf, Sparky from Stevens, Florida, Will Porta, SingletreeTravel.com, Fat Tony's PJs from New York, Devon the CFP, Gloria, Gray Zone, Peepaw, Jay, Sugar Brady, Marcus with a Q, DP4 Bongo, Sam, John, Niemeister, Edwin, and vote Gloria Young for King of the New World Order. Edison, Jeremy, a dog named Checker, Sarah Jeannie, Matthew, Dr. G, Neil, his nerdiness Charles, Audrey stole Adler's spot, Darren, Idris Arslanian, Bluefront and the Lenina, Berkeley, Steven, Chad, Zombie Doc, Matt P, Chill, Adam, Chief Andy, Robert, Casey, Paul, Dustin, Brad, D. Laser, Nick Wood, Just Another Pilot, Middle-Aged Mike, Utah, Jimmy Montana, The Jen, Alo, D. Really, Craig, and Andrew. You want your name read on the show. One place to go, TakePoliticsSeriously.com. On Friday's edition of the program, the money man, Dave Leventhal, comes on to talk about a few different really important things. Number one, how we are to process the money bomb that has fallen into the lap of Kamala Harris. Number two, scam packs. I want to talk to Leventhal about this. I want to give you guys some news you can use. A lot of you guys are getting a lot of different text messages from a lot of different people from all sides of the aisle, how you can determine whether or not the money you would give to them is even going to the campaign, and how many of them are just straight out scams. Help yourself, help your parents, help your family, heal the world. That's Friday on PX3. Until then, this is your old pal Justin Robert Young saying, some shows talk about politics, others talk about politics, and still more discuss politics. But this is the only show that dares discuss all three.